Welcome to the Gen Z Journey, where we work with you through an entrepreneurial lens to build a wholesome perspective on life and build both our business and personal dreams together. Join our community on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Gen Z Journey. So, hello and welcome to another Gen Z Journey podcast. You're back with us today on a discussion podcast on this 3-week series on the topic of financial literacy. And I'm really excited actually for this week's podcast because we're doing something slightly different with the discussions. We don't have Joe with us this week, but instead we have a guest on who has written the article for this week's publication, and he will be discussing about the topic that he wrote on, which is the topic of credit cards. And so that's I'm really excited, firstly, just to get into that topic because it's so relevant and so important to people. Important to me as well. I just got my first credit card about 2 weeks ago now, so definitely something I need to be learning and getting more knowledge about. And also I'm just excited to have this kind of new format to the podcast for our discussion midweek podcast. So without further ado, let's actually first introduce yourself, Jackson, and who you are, and then we'll get into the meat of the article that you wrote for this week's publication. So Jackson, who are you, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Definitely. Well, first of all, just thank you for this opportunity, writing the article and having me on. Really appreciate it, both you, Rio, Aaron. But yeah, I'm Jackson St. Amant. I'm a 23-year-old out here in California. As of January this year, I've been a financial coach helping young entrepreneurs, mostly high school grads, pretty much just kind of master their money in the sense of the mindset, the habits, the tools that you need to be successful with your money. Prior to that, the last 10 years I've spent as a math tutor. So I have sort of a lot of experience with that one-on-one, kind of helping people transform their ideas into kind of the future that they want to see for themselves. And as of late, I've been helping young entrepreneurs, like I said, and so far so good.
Yeah. And Jackson is, I'll get Aaron to speak on this as well, but Jackson is just an awesome individual. You know, he's one of the most wholesome individuals I've met. And you know, the first conversation we gelled instantly. We were both in it to help each other out, setting up win-win situations. He's just a really genuine individual. And if you want some inspiration daily and some awesome daily advice on finances as well, I would recommend going and following him and connecting with him on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'd love for you to connect with him anyway, and just have a conversation with him. But yeah, his content is great on there as well. I love reading that. It's a great morning inspiration for myself. So yeah, definitely go and check out his stuff.
Yeah, and I completely vouch for his mindset and his ability to really have some sort of a very deep understanding of financial literacy, really, and it's one that you don't really get with younger people, and so it's amazing to see someone that I can really relate to and really talk to that understands what it is to be financially literate and just to have that financial stability in your life and not feel stressed about it all the time once you understand it.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Alrighty then, let's dig straight into the content of this podcast because I'm excited to get onto that. So the first question I had is so actually I should say before we start this, the title of this article is credit cards, and the question is it a necessary evil? And so the first question I want to ask you, Jackson, is what was your intention behind writing this article, and why do you feel like this is an important subject?
That's a great question. So the reason why I wrote this article is twofold. I mean, first off, just the idea of financial education and how little it's touched on, especially in younger generations. I think there's a big gap in our traditional education system. I mean, I spent the last 10 years helping people with the traditional, with math, but I realized that there's, once you enter quote unquote the real world, there's a lot of skills that aren't taught in school that people really need to know, and how to properly use a credit card is definitely one of them. And the other reason too is there's a lot of conflicting advice out there, in terms of should you even have a credit card to begin with. I know personally, I never, it's not something my parents really taught me about. And I spent a lot of my, like, from 18 to 22 not having a credit card because I viewed it as just a way to get into debt. And I personally saw a lot of people, have credit cards bite them in one way or another. So I avoided them until I started to see the advantages. And so I think the sooner you're able to see that and utilize a credit card, or pick your stance in the other direction, the better.
And I find it funny that you talk a little bit about the traditional teaching in school versus what you actually need to be taught. I actually learned yesterday that only 21 states out of all 50 states require at least one personal finance class in high school before you graduate. So there's literally the majority of schools, what, 29 schools or 29 states do not have schools that require a financial, like a personal finance class. And that's just an intro class that you take for what, one semester, one quarter, and then it's a skill that you need for the next 70 years of your life. So why is it that knowing that it's such a vital part of your life that we require so little education on it?
Right. It's curious to me as well.
It's it's an amazing topic, and one of the stories I have on that was from one of our guests, Jedediah Collins. He's a CFP, ex NFL player, and he was talking about one of his friends who I believe was a doctor. I may be wrong on that, but he was a very intelligent individual academically. He'd achieved a lot. But the financial literacy of just any generation, it's so little that he didn't understand credit cards. And he was speaking to Jedediah one day, and he said, oh yeah, I keep getting these letters through about some card or something, and it was letters about his credit card. He wasn't paying it off monthly. He'd just spend on it and then didn't touch it at all, and he was paying off the interest, I think, but he wasn't paying anything else because he just thought it was like a debit card. This is an individual who's been through the academic system and achieved a lot with it, but that academic system is set up so much that he didn't even understand the principle of credit cards. So that's a state of financial literacy that we're in, and I think it's awesome that people like yourself, Jackson, are, and you, Aaron, actually as well, just pushing to really help people and get people educated on it, because it's so important, right? And really helps us reach the goals that we want to achieve. So then my next question for you, Jackson, is what are the two philosophies behind credit cards? Because you started off your article with these two kind of philosophies, two kind of ideals behind it, which I really enjoyed reading about. So just give us a little summary and overview of what those philosophies are.
Definitely. So there's one school of thought that says that credit is evil and should be avoided at all costs. That's like championed by Dave Ramsey, I would say, or at least he's the first one who I heard really be extremely vocal about that. He'll tell you to cut up your credit cards. I think is how I started the article, because he hates them that much. And the idea behind it is, I mean, there's a couple different concepts, but really credit cards are a good way for people who don't have responsible money habits to begin with, who don't hold a budget, whatnot, which honestly is, I would argue, the majority of Americans. It's a good way for them to get into a lot of financial trouble, get into significant debt, and pay ridiculously high interest rates too. Credit cards have the highest interest rates by far compared to any other loan that you could take out. So or any kind of like borrowed money, so to speak. And I think one of the reasons why Dave argues that it's so easy to do that is because it's just a small little piece of plastic. And emotionally, when you're spending money, you're a lot less attached to using that, just to swiping a card, than it would be if you said like spent your cash, right? Like if you spent $50 cash, that's like, ooh, $50. You kind of feel that more than if you just swipe a card. And so that's one of the reasons why they say don't keep a credit card, and that's kind of the ideas behind that philosophy. But on the other hand, there's a school of thought that says you need to have credit, and you should learn how to use credit cards responsibly, and that's because increasingly our society is becoming dependent on your credit score as kind of like a marker of how good or how risky you are as a borrower. And having a good credit score gives you a lot of advantages in our society. It gives you lower interest rates. It gives you a lot more options when it comes to student loans, auto loans, like pretty much anything, mortgages, even like renters applications, they'll check your credit. So I think because of that, there's a strong argument to be made that learning how to use credit cards responsibly, it would be better or more advantageous to your situation overall than to just avoid them, like Dave Ramsey says.
Yeah, 100%. And an interesting, again, I want to share another story on that is my credit journey so far. I'm just starting out on it, and actually that whole thing about how important credit score is, and it's really hard to even get your first credit card, because of the whole credit score situation. But the interesting thing was that when we started the Gen Z journey, I was actually I forget what they call it. Is it co-user?
Yeah, I added Rio onto one of my credit card lines because we were gonna initially I had a credit card that I didn't really use, and I figured I could add him onto it, and we could run all our expenses through that credit card instead of our bank account, because our bank account was taking weeks to set up, mainly because we weren't in person and everything, and it made it a little bit more difficult. So yeah, I added him into it, and it's actually what got him his first own credit card.
It gave me that 3 month of credit score history gave me enough of a score for me to get my first credit card through Chase Bank. So yeah, it was excellent. Even the banker that was helping me through it was like, "This is awesome." So that was great. Exactly. And so then, with these two philosophies behind kind of credit cards, the use and their purpose, and all of that, what is your opinion? I really loved your analogy on this. So what is your opinion on how we can use credit cards?
Definitely. So, I mean, if you do choose to use credit cards, like the analogy that I use is that they're kind of like fire. Fire in like is very useful, and humans have evolved to use it to our advantage. But if you're kind of reckless with it, like we all know what happens when you play with fire, right? So, I think when it comes to credit cards, you really just need to be responsible with the way that you're using them, and what that looks like would be, I mean, first of all, using them only on purchases that you could afford outright. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they kind of see it as like free money that they don't already have, and so they'll buy big purchases that they can't afford, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'll just pay it off at the end of the month." But what happens if you don't have the money to do that at the end of the month? You end up paying interest and spending more money than you would have to begin with. And so that's one of the biggest golden rules when it comes to having a credit card, I would say. Also, making sure that you're paying it on time all the time, every single time, just because your credit score, the biggest thing that makes up your credit score, about 35% of it, is your payment history. So it's as simple as just paying your credit card off or whatever, even if it's the minimum or whatever amount you can afford. As long as you're doing that on time, you're boosting your score. Also, keeping a low balance. Another thing that makes up your credit score is utilization, which is kind of like how much money you're borrowing compared to how much you're given. So different credit cards have different limits. Say your credit limit's 2,000. And you keep a balance of around 200, then you're only using 10% utilization. And so if you try to keep that under 30% is what they say, then you'll be boosting your score. So that's another thing to focus on. And then lastly, I recommend people to have a mix of credit cards instead of just one. There are all these great perks, right? Like cash back you can get for gas, groceries, all this stuff. And so why not break that into separate cards that you use specifically for gas, specifically for groceries, or for travel? Because that also benefits your score. Having a longer credit history and having a mix of cards is about 25% combined.
Yeah, and I think it's actually important that you brought up the fact that each credit card can have a specific utilization, because a lot of people just want to have that one card, but in the long term, it's not good for your credit history in the terms of diversity, because it shows that you're not really capable of managing more than one account. And so it is important to have more than one credit card to show that, I have 7 credit lines, I can manage all 7. And with that being said, it's not only good for you in terms of a credit score, but it also even helps you break down your budgeting for the month or your budgeting for the year, because you can actually use credit cards for just groceries and just gas, and then use another one for just personal expenditures, and then use other credit cards for specific categories. And then at the end of the month or at the end of the year, you can really actually have a breakdown of specifically every expenditure for that category. And so it can actually help some people learn a budget. And so there's a lot of benefits to it in that sense. And you also mentioned the fact that you can put your expenditures on it, and there's a lot of benefits to your expenditures being on a credit card versus a debit card. I'm not sure if that's something you want to expand on a little bit more, Jackson.
Yeah, definitely. Well, with a debit card, you are just spending money that you have on the purchase, but with a credit card, they do offer perks. If you're able to spend money that you have and then pay it off, you can get a percentage cash back or in certain categories, depending on what the card is.
Yeah, yeah, as well as you get consumer protection. So, you spend money that's not technically yours. And so something is to go wrong. Let's say, you purchase something on eBay, and then you purchase it with your credit card, and next thing you know, they sent you a fake Louis Vuitton bag or a fake iPhone or something like that. You can actually complain to the credit card company, and they'll make sure that you figure that out before you have to pay the amount for that item. Versus with the debit card, you already paid out that money, and your bank is going to be less likely to fight it and give you back your money because it's already out of your hands. They already kind of gave it to someone else. Versus the credit card, that's their own money, and so they're going to be like, shoot, I don't want to lose this, so I'm going to make sure that I can do everything I can to help that consumer.
Right. They have more of a vested interest to fight on your behalf, which exactly protects you.
Awesome. And as a kind of the final subject I wanted to touch on with credit cards, and it's something that I think people our age kind of battle with, and I know friends do as well, is that so just having the debit cards and your bank accounts, it's very simple and easy to manage your money. You can budget that well because it's just money you have, and you don't, you're not worrying about paying it off. You're not worrying about time periods and about money that you don't have. It's just money that you have, and it keeps it simple. But one of the things I've started to become aware of as I've began my credit journey is that actually that's all good and that's great, and it keeps it simple, and you can build wealth that way. However, starting on the credit journey and starting to try and strategize this financial plan is that actually things do get a lot more complex, right? Because you're managing multiple different kind of sources and things like that. But actually, as things get more complicated and you become more aware and more intelligent of it, I find that then using it to your advantage is actually you can get to where you want to go a lot quicker. On different things, whether that be through your purchases, whether that be through just life goals, whatever it is, learning things as they get more complicated and then really getting in depth in them can help you get to where you want to go. And Jackson, I just wanted you to speak on that. Is like, do you agree with that kind of philosophy that actually, yes, it is more complicated and yes, it can be scary at points, but actually doing it and just taking the time to learn it can help you get to where you want to go quicker?
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's at first it's very uncomfortable to be managing and juggling all these different accounts. I know for me, I was super scared, like, oh gosh, what if one slips through the cracks? Because I'm championing this idea of don't miss a payment. What if I miss a payment? But but I think that stepping out of your comfort zone in any regard when it comes to finances or any aspect of life is the best way for us to grow and for it to become more comfortable over time. So yeah, I would encourage anyone as soon as possible, if they feel like they can have the healthy habits that they need with a credit card to build that wealth sustainably, then yeah, jump into it as soon as you can.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with Jackson. I completely agree with Rio, and I do have a couple of examples actually. The first example is, if you kind of stuck with that idea of, or you're afraid of missing payments, but you have the money for what you're spending or whatever, set your credit card on auto payments just in case you do forget. I always manually pay off my credit card usually 2 days after the purchase once it's posted onto the credit card, just so it instantly comes out of my bank account and I know how much is left in my bank account. But there have been times actually in the past 3 years and building my credit history where I forgot a payment, but luckily I had my payment on auto pay and it just took it out of my bank account, and that's completely fine for me because I know I always had the money for it. But even if you don't have the money, you're better off having that be overdrafted on your bank account and going negative on your bank account and paying that $25 overdraft fee than you are missing the credit card payment. So, that's something important to keep in mind. And in terms of really building wealth, like Rio said, it's really important to have management and be able to get into the complexities of credit history, because it does genuinely help you build wealth faster. And the best example that I can give of this is, think about buying a home. If you were to try to buy a home with a debit card, essentially cash, you would need your cash up front. How are you going to make $500,000? It would take you years upon years, decades for the average person to be able to save up $500,000 to purchase their house. And, if you live in any big city, you're going to have to have $500,000, if not more, to buy a tiny little home. Whether you're in Seattle like me, or in California, really anywhere in California like Rio, you're going to need a lot of money to buy a home, right? And so, if you really want to build your wealth faster, you would buy that home outright with that small 5-10% down payment, 20% if it's your first home. Um, and instead of having to put $500,000 down, if you put 20%, you only put $100,000 down. And it's a lot quicker to build that. And think about that. In that decade that you have your home, from the very beginning of $500,000, it would appreciate. Let's say your house appreciates 20%. In that time, you actually made $100,000 more than you would have not having that home. And so that idea of being able to have that cash up front, because your money is worth more now than it is later, gives you that opportunity to build money on that kind of arbitrage of appreciation in our in our economy. So yeah, that's just something to always keep in mind.
Certainly. Well, I think that does a great job of giving an overview of kind of what this article is all about. We covered a lot in there. I don't tend to go into too much depth of the article, because I want people to go and read it, because there's so much value in it. It's so informative that, just going and having a read, it'll take you 5 minutes to read, and it can give you so much education and information. So definitely go and check that out. It's on the website as always. The link will be in the description of this podcast. But before we end things and we wrap things up, as we always do, Jackson, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to advertise who you are, what your business is, and kind of what you're doing. You mentioned it at the start of this podcast, but just give us an overview of the business and what you're doing.
Definitely. So the financial education business I run is called Money Mastermind. Right now it's just a one-on-one mentorship program. So I work with, like I said, like young entrepreneurs, recent high school grads, college grads, anyone who really wants to fill in that gap in terms of financial education and start to take on building wealth seriously from a young age. So you can go ahead. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so that's just my name, Jackson St. Amant. Go ahead and check me out there. You can see my content. I'm on Instagram too, at Money Mastermind FC, and then my website is moneymastermindllc.com.
Perfect. Yeah, and I mean the links for all of those, for the website, for the Instagram, and for the LinkedIn, will all be in the description, so you can go straight from here to Jackson. And if you're listening to us now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever it may be, then like I always say as well, we're available on YouTube. You can find this video on YouTube, and that just gives a bit more of an experience. You can see Jackson, myself, and Aaron really conversing about this topic. So yeah, again, Jackson, thanks so much for firstly writing the article this week and then also coming on and speaking about it. I really appreciate your time, and let's finish as we always do.
Cheers
for now.